co-host as well. All righty. Well, welcome everyone. My name's John Mudd. I'm the chair of the Midtown South Community Council meeting today. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate having you. Uh, Today, we're going to be discussing Lynn Ellsworth, Wonder City, how to reclaim a human scale urban life. We're going to be discussing, Viren's going to be here, Viren Brahmbhatt. He was here last month. We're going to be discussing the Midtown South Mixed-Use Plan. And we're also going to be discussing NYCHA. They've put out uh, some letters to the residents. They're asking them to leave. They're calling it a done deal. We've had a meeting last night, webinar last night that explained a lot, and we're still fighting. So we want you in on that fight. As far as our purpose, we're here to kind of triage the issues and talk about them and trying to find some solutions to the homeless and housing issues. Our policy meeting, we haven't had a policy meeting. We're working on possibly a housing meeting prior to discuss way forward with housing, a people's plan. Council highlights. Okay, if you haven't looked at the annual report, please do. We need board members, particularly a treasurer. We've been hosted on some radio stations and some podcasts. If you'd like to click on some of these and take a look at it, I think we've had some interesting guests and we talked about some very important issues. Generosa, if you don't know her, she's an 84-year-old lady. She was put out of her apartment for about 5 years. We got her back in. I was made aware of it like last year, I think, and started working on it. And we recently had got its Good Neighbor Award. And Alex, and we have some special introductions and updates. If anybody has them, please let me know. Alex, anything on your end?
Um, I just want to say that there's casino updates on Newsday and the Daily News, and I popped those into the chat, and they're really concise and clear. Three are in Manhattan, and the others are spread throughout Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Westchester. And there's only going to be three ultimately given out. And let's hope Times Square isn't one of the awardees.
They're actually giving the permits out? Is that what you said?
No, well, I mean, my knowledge is very limited, but I think there are 8 competing plans and only 3 are going to win. And one of them dropped out, WYNN win with Hudson Yards. So it used to be 9 and now there's 8. And Friday afternoon was the deadline for the plan. So those 2 articles in the chat will explain it nicely.
Very nice. We were part of that fight. We've been over at the meetings. We've been pushing for no casino over there in the Hudson Rail Yards. I know the Broadway folks are fighting against the casino in Times Square, and
Right.
I was aware of some other locations, but I think we're going to have to kind of support each other on that issue. I don't think we want casinos here. I don't think anybody would disagree with me. I hope not.
The Hotel Trades Council, HTC, I believe, they're for the Times Square casino. They did this whole rally, and let's just hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Um, anything new on the Stock Transfer Act or?
No, I'm just waiting for a map, and I think it should be coming within the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then we can get that rolling.
Okay, very good. Um, does anyone else have any updates for us? Anyone at all?
Can I just say about the casinos, there's one other one in Hell's Kitchen, right, on 11th Avenue?
Yes, the Avenir. It's one of the 8.
Right, yeah. So just there's two in the Midtown South area.
Yes, good point. And I know someone who's very local to that intersection, 41st, and she doesn't want that Avenir to happen either.
They're throwing a lot at us. City of Yes, we're part of that lawsuit. They got the Midtown mixed use. We've got the upzoning. We've got GPP plan. They're throwing in. They basically want to no restrictions, no bar. All out. We'll develop what we want. Idea. And unfortunately, there's so much being thrown at us. It's really hard to keep up with and hard to mass coalitions to fight. We're doing pretty well, I think. I think we're doing the best we can, but we have to try a little harder. Um, Anyone else have any?
I do. I'm Miriam Fisher.
Hi,
There's
Mary.
another Miriam Fisher who spells her name so slightly differently, who I think I was told to be sure I differentiate myself. Anyway, I'm the one who's been working feverishly on expanding accessibility and was the catalyst for getting, if people don't know that, the MTA approved 2 elevators on 23rd Street, on 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue in the capital plan. And I'm also right now working on improving accessibility in the bus stops in Committee Board 4 in terms of adding seats and shelter from bad weather. So I'm the elevator lady.
Yes, I remember. Thanks, Marianne, for all your good work. We, of course, support you. If you need us to sign on to any letters of support, we're more than happy to. Your camera's a little off center there. We can't see your lovely face.
Oh, it's the way I'm
There we
kind
go.
of stretching out.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I'll try to
Uh,
sit up. My back is hurting, so I've been on the
um,
sofa,
sorry to
lying
hear that.
straight.
I'm sorry to hear that. And anybody else um, for updates for this meeting? Renee's joining us. I think Renee might have an update or two. Renee,
Yes.
you have any updates you want to share? Anything you want to share? We're doing the updates right now. We're getting ready to go into our agenda soon.
No updates.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. We still have people joining us. Our Luana's not on. I was going to go with her. She was going to be a little shorter. Lynn, we'll go right into Lynn, and then we'll be speaking to Viren after Lynn. Okay, Lynn. Lynn's written a book. She completed. She worked very hard on it, and we're happy. By the way, she's in France right now, right? And so she's joining us, and I think your time clock is way off, right? And I'm going to drop this, and bring we'll pin Lynn to the floor. Lynn, why don't you take it
So
away?
great. I have some pictures to share with you. If I could share my PowerPoint, it just has
Yeah,
pictures.
you've got co-host. You're
Oh, I do. Okay, so let me just give me a second to sort that out. So many tabs open here. Where am I? Google Slides.
I do that a lot myself.
Yeah, way too many tabs. Okay, which is my tab? That's not it. That's not it. Here we go. Okay, so
I noticed they changed this format a little bit too.
all right, so share. So am I screen sharing now? Can
Yes,
you?
sure.
Okay, so let me just put it into slideshow and
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to be really short with you guys. I know you have a lot to talk about with everything going on, so I'll just introduce myself briefly, and I'm going to describe my book a little bit, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So, if you haven't met me before, I'm Lynn Ellsworth. I'm an economist. I am a researcher, but I am also an activist. I founded the Tribeca Trust, the Friends of Dwayne Park, the Citywide Land Use Coalition, the Empire Station Coalition, and Humanscale NYC. And for about 10 years now, I've been working off and on a book, which finally came out just like 6 weeks ago, about the development fights in New York City. It's called Wonder City, How to Reclaim Human Scale Urban Life. Fordham University Press did it. It went through 6, count them, 6 peer reviews, which is just weird, but they're all good. It just took forever to get this book out. So I thought what I would do is give you an overview of what's in it and the arguments I have, because, I wrote this book, even though it's a university press, I wrote it in, accessible language, non-econ speak, for the activists for a human scale city who seeing our city destroyed by so much that's going on, and to give people arguments and tools, a weapon to argue with, I guess, because that's, I'm an academic in the end. So in this book, I start off with chapter 1, and it's a discussion of how there are 2 competing, conflicting, warring visions about the kind of city we should have. There's the human scale Jane Jacobs city that's fit for children and birds and small businesses. And then there's the mega tower city for the rich, the corporations, and the chain stores. And that chapter explains the origins of these 2 visions of what a city should be, and how they compete in the policy realm. And where they came from, and sort of I traced the ideas for them through time. And then I go into 2 chapters with a discussion of a complete takedown. It is the only takedown I know of in the academic literature that is as comprehensive. It's 2 full chapters where I take down the supply side housing theory of the YIMBY and abundance advocates. And some of that does, of necessity, get a little technical. I have to use some econ words because I'm arguing with a famous economist from Harvard, Ed Glazer, who is the sort of guru of that supply side housing theory. And it takes a long time to take him down, every inch. It's a 360-degree takedown. Ed Glazer at Harvard thinks that skyscrapers in Manhattan are the only way to build, and that we have to demolish our historic districts. And, that's his thing. And the YIMBYs and abundance people from the New York Times and Atlantic have latched onto his theories and tried to popularize them for the Democratic Party. So I move on then to a whole chapter that analyzes the whole problem of historic districts and how they contribute to great urbanism in New York City, and how they are creating a public commons, and that the YIMBY Glazer idea, abundance idea of demolishing them, is literally economic stupidity for New York City. I cover also in there the first bit of a long story that goes throughout the book of big real estate's attack on historic districts and their attack on the Landmarks Commission and their attempt to literally take it over, which they succeeded in doing. And then let's see if I can move on. And then I turn to a discussion. There's a couple chapters now where I turn to the problem of, of big real estate and what they want, and how their vision for the city. And so this is an illustration you see of it's just a generic illustration of what you call the sky dome. and how the game now in New York, in Manhattan, in the core of the city, is see all the airspace above the buildings. That's what they want. That's what they're after. They want to seize that for themselves and sell it off to the world's rich. That's the game. And that's what they're doing. And they have succeeded massively, particularly in Midtown. So the game is over the proliferation of construction into the Sky Dome of Manhattan. And then I have a chapter really that is like, well, how has big real estate literally taken over our city government? They literally own the mayor. They own most of the city council. They have taken over our regulatory agencies. And I describe in minuscule detail how that happens. And these are just some illustrations that are in the book. You know, our former mayor, de Blasio, you know, arm in arm with the former head of the Real Estate Board of New York, Spinola. And then we have our governor and a few other of the big real estate dudes, all, and Rebney, happy at the annual Rebney gathering, which, you know, happens every year, usually in Midtown. But that chapter is really about the different tools that Rebney uses to maintain its power over us and over city policy, everything to do with zoning, everything to do with rent control, everything to do with the campaign finance system. They use it to control policy in the city. And they've succeeded incrementally over time to now where they're just like in total dominance. I give lots of detail and empirical evidence about that. So then I sort of shift gears in this book and I talk about the problem of the modernist architects who have worked hand in hand with big real estate to destroy the historic city, particularly New York, but all the historic cities of the United States. This is a picture of their charter, their desiderata of what they want to do, written by Le Corbusier, an architect who is their founding guru. And basically they say that they have to destroy, they are morally obligated to destroy the historic city and rebuild it anew. And modernist architects are trained to sign into that. Most of them don't even know that it comes from this book, but because they don't read books. Architects don't read books, they look at pictures. But you know, I sort of trace the ideology of modernist architecture and how it's hostile to great urbanism. Let's see, there you go. So in that chapter, I do some fun things. I present a series of 10 pictures of world famous architects and discuss the issue of their hypocrisy. So this is an example of de Meuron and Herzog. They're famous Swiss architects who designed the Jenga building in Lower Manhattan, where I live. But their offices are in one of the most historically protected cities in the world, Basel, Switzerland, and that's their headquarters where they started their design work. That little lovely building in Basel. Here we have a picture of Frank Gehry, Mr. Skyscraper, who designed, you know, the Spruce Street building in Lower Manhattan. And where does he live? Well, he lives in a single family home with a grassy yard in Santa Monica, California. Actually, I think he moved recently, but he was there for like 30 years of his life. Same thing here. We have Renzo Piano, who designed the new Manhattanville campus for Columbia University, where my husband works, which is an all-glass monstrosity that required the demolition of much of the historic fabric of Harlem. He designs glass stuff like this. But where does he live? He lives here in this building called the Place des Vosges. It's probably one of the most historic, famous buildings in all of Paris. He lives on the 3rd floor there. That's his exact apartment, just to say. And you're not allowed to touch it. So that chapter has a lot of fun in it because I am really like nailing them. But then I turn into the problem of like, what do we actually do to deal with the problem? And it's a huge, huge problem. I illustrated here with how like the zoning code needs massive reform. And I don't mean Elon Musk reform. I mean a Jane Jacobs style overhaul. This is simply an illustration of how developers assemble air rights, because the air rights are so loosely regulated in the city that you can kind of stack them on top. And that blue zone is where they've stacked air rights from other buildings on top of one site to create like a super tall in the South Street Seaport area. And this happens all over the city as of right. And it's basically the city is in favor of even more deregulation of the air rights, as if there's any regulation going on right now, which there's not. So, you know, they want to create a free open market in air rights where any developer can sort of trade them and put them anywhere in the city. But that chapter really, to close out on that, I'm going to stop the screen share now. You know, that chapter is really about all the range of policy solutions that we can do about affordable housing, about zoning, about historic preservation. You know, it's not like I have the answer to every single question, but I provide a framework for analyzing policy solutions in this domain. Because does the policy, how does it impact small business? How does it impact the Humanscale city? Is it destructive of our historic fabric? Questions that do not get asked at any point in the current setup. So it's pretty much a call for like total revolution in how we manage our city. But it requires a takedown. It's like we citizens have to find a way to take our city back from big real estate. And that is a huge task because we have been rendered pretty powerless in the official system. We need, you know, obviously a massive overhaul of our campaign finance system, but also our city charter. And I lay out in that chapter specific changes we need in the city charter in order to make the city more democratic. And, you know, there you go. So that's the big picture overall of the book. You know, I see these issues playing out in Midtown, around Penn Station, around NYCHA. I've been involved in hundreds of fights all over the city over the past 15 years, and I am not, I'm not optimistic, just to say. I would like to be more optimistic about the ability of those of us who would like a more human scale city to end the reign of big real estate over us. You know, I feel like we've become serfs to big real estate. So there you go. I'll end there. And
Well, I'm with you on the optimism, but when you take so much time to write this book and put all this energy and lay it all out, that gives me optimism. When we went to a webinar and we decipher and we go to these rallies, decipher the issues like last night even, we talked about NYCHA and we're battling NYCHA and we come together. That gives me optimism. I'm with you. I see the power of the real estate, and I'm looking forward to really digging in on your book because I've often said I don't think we can fathom the control they have on this city. And what you've done, with your analysis, if you had a 3 or 5 point plan, so far I'm hearing from you is attack the zoning, fix the zoning, the city charter. Where else do you see us going as a pack? Maybe
well, to be honest, I think that there's sort of a two-pronged thing that has to happen with a united opposition across all the multiplicity of opposition forces that are in the city, which are everywhere, but people are lost in their individual fights. You know, there's some ridiculous tower going up next to, you know, Park Slope, and you know, people are fighting that, and it's just like, you know, big real estate has the advantage is that we're scattered in a million fights and they're like deep pocketed. And so first of all, we need to unite. And second, we need to attack the campaign finance system that allows them to own the politicians. Like, it's the same as, the issue of, Citizens United problem at the national level. At the city level, we have the same problem, is that they pay the politicians through the campaign finance system, and it's hard to beat them. So we have to change the rules of the game there. So that's number one. But we also have to change the rules of the game in the city charter that allow the intense and ridiculous, absurd levels of conflict of interest that exist, like in how they appoint people to the community boards, to the Department of City Planning, to the city planning commissioners, to the landmarks commissioners, to the Bureau of Standards and Appeals commissioners. Like any regulatory agency in New York that has anything to do with real estate is just overwhelmingly a fox guarding the henhouse situation. And that's allowed in the city charter. And we at Humanscale NYC, we tried to fight this at the last Charter Revision Commission, and we had like mounted groups of people who came in and presented testimony that we need to change the rules of the game, that if you have affiliation with big real estate, like you can't be on, or in any sector, if you're in the food and restaurant industry, you can't be regulating the food and restaurant industry. It's obvious, but big real estate was running that commission. So we had one friend on the Charter Commission who tried to help us, but he was overruled by, the appointees from the commission who are on big real estate. So we lost on that, but that's not something that is forever. You keep going, you keep trying to change that. And I think also, we're going to need to elect a new type of city council member. I'm sorry, but I don't like your city council member, Botcher.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are having some difficulties with him.
Yeah.
And,
John, I see a hand from
yes,
Rashida.
I have two more, and then I see some hands popping up. Yeah, and they're also infiltrating the community boards.
Absolutely. So you change the campaign finance system, you change the city charter, and that gives you some power to then get in and do the other changes that you need, like the zoning changes and stuff like that. Because without power, you can't change the zoning. You can't do anything without the power. You got to first get power. And so.
Yeah. I spoke to an activist that worked on a national level, and she says, the national level is just so tremendously hard. And she suggested on the city level, and that where I see it is with the council people, is where we could take charge.
Yes.
But we have to do it on a massive scale, even on the city level, other districts.
I know. Well, I think one thing that's optimistic to me about the Mamdani scenario that just played out is, look, I've been a member of my Democratic club in Lower Manhattan, the Downtown Independent Democrats. I've been a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I know both deep inside. And I'm like, I'm so delighted that the political clubs got spanked in this election. It's just like, and I'm like, well, the young people are coming out and kicking ass. And I know the criticisms of Mamdani, and I agree with some of them. I'm delighted to see young people coming out.
Yeah.
And wow. I remember when I was young, I'm 68 years old, but I remember when I was like 20 years old and I thought, you could change the world. And they still think you can change the world. Isn't that great?
Yeah, it gives you energy. Yeah, it really gives me a little hope too. And so we need to support them. And Rashida, she's been had her hand up for a little bit. Go ahead, Rashida.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. I had a question, and this is just, I'm from the activist world, and I'm working with the New York State Council of Churches now, and with their Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative. And I see the dichotomy between trying to change zoning and rezoning to help churches build, where there may be this entity or entities that come in that are actually doing the big skyscrapers and taking over the light and the air that's left in New York City, and that's expanding into the tall skyscrapers. And so, that are tearing down historic structures. So I kind of am in this space where, I'm actually glad it didn't pass this year. We have some chance to restructure the bill, that we want to work in ways to protect historical structures, but we want to make sure that churches, particularly those that have historic buildings, are not just living in museums that are crumbling around them. Because the problem is you have where churches are looking to sell, to build sell air rights, because there is not there's no comparable income coming in. There aren't programs out there that are helping them maintain those structures, and they're crumbling. So then they're getting desperate and looking to sell. And then you have the developers who come in and they're like, well, we want to build, to the heavens, and they're just coming in. So I see a need that we have to find a way to merge the desire to keep neighborhoods historic and human scale, and help these entities that own these historic structures preserve them, make that I don't want to say worthwhile, but make it so that they can do that. Because the problem is, you have a church and literally the ceiling is falling in, and they're looking at a developer going to pay them $3.5 million, and they're saying we can't sustain. So I'm really looking at how we can make it work, because ultimately what you're saying for the ideal city of the Gene Jacobs vision is more ideal than what we're seeing being built. But how do we make sure that that vision is able to be implemented?
Right. This is a really interesting and tough question. I've thought about it a lot. I have interesting stories about that, because my best friend from high school, Gretchen Lord, lived in Midtown. And, the little church around the corner, the Actors Church, like on 24th, 26th Street, I forget, and over on, I forget the cross street there. But she was on the vestry when they decided, their church was crumbling. The roof was crumbling in, it was leaking. And, it's this gorgeous historic building. She was actually even married there. And she was on the vestry, and she, helped negotiate a deal to build this giant, insane, tall tower right next to the church, so that the church could have like a little space, and the church got a little deal out of it. And then she now lives in New Jersey, doesn't even live in the neighborhood anymore, and walks around there. And she goes, oh my God, what did I do? What did I negotiated that, she says. And I am sorry that I did that. But the problem is sort of twofold. The first is that we have a legal problem, that we are not allowed, the separation of church and state does not allow us to kind of run roughshod over what a church might want to do. That is a huge problem. So our only weapon is the Landmarks Commission, which unfortunately has been taken over by big real estate, so is no longer playing its role. Landmarks Commission can regulate that and stop the most extreme versions. The second part of the solution is that we don't have a dedicated income stream for churches that no longer have viable congregations. Let's remember that all these churches were built by local congregations who put the money up to build them, right? Those local congregations are gone. There's nobody willing to do it anymore. They don't have enough religious observers coming in with some money, so like they had when they first built the church. So there's not enough of an income stream, of which there have been many proposals on the table to create a dedicated income stream so that churches can come and say, well, look, instead of selling out to a big real estate developer, can you give us some money to fix the roof so we're not leaking anymore? And that money is in tiny supply. Basically, there's almost none of it. The Landmarks Conservancy has a tiny fund for that, and that's the rest of it. But there are plenty of ways to create that revenue stream for them, the city has to want to do it.
Yeah, I know a few churches who are struggling with just that too. Metro Baptists, or they work on grants, and they're real close here, and they do some incredible work. They have some nonprofits. They support the homeless issues and coat drives, and it's amazing work they do, and I'm happy to be a part of that. And they've destroyed, well, it's not livable for families, and so who congregates at a church, or the community. So they're really it boils down to destroying our family, our community.
Right.
Yeah.
The city has to want, look, there's solutions here. They're all political.
Yeah.
It's changing the rules of the game, and it's finding us. Look, it doesn't cost that much to fix a roof. It really doesn't, especially these little buildings, it really doesn't. So the churches can't be greedy, and I'm going to yell at the Catholic Church on this, because look what they did at St. Patrick's Church, which was not even in disarray on Fifth Avenue. They sold all their air rights, greedily over the Midtown rezoning. And what did they do with all that revenue from they used it to pay off the abuse cases that the Catholic Church had against little kids, the families of kids, for all the abuse that happened. And I'm thinking, great, the church didn't even have to pay for that. They used revenue from the sky to do it, to get rid of all those lawsuits. So, I don't know. The Catholic Diocese of New York is not, they play the real estate game as much as anybody. Same with Trinity Real Estate, who owns like massive amount. They'll demolish anything. So the only game in town is the Landmarks Commission and a revenue stream to fix the church situation, so that they stop selling out for giant towers and air rights. It's the only way to fix that game.
Yeah. Alex has a question.
Well, I'm just very glad you mentioned taking power back from real estate, who runs this town. And I 1,000% agree with that. I think everyone here knows that has to happen. One thing that might give a little hope in that vein is something I came across from Cranes, the business website, and it says here, related companies, which is just one example, has been unloading a massive portfolio of rent-stabilized out-of-borough sites that Related purchased pre-2019 after reportedly not being able to cover renovation costs by boosting the building's revenues. And Related has incurred losses of between 20% and 60% on its investments. So, I don't cheer when people lose money, but when real estate giants lose money, yeah, I'm happy. I don't care. And so, if they're losing on that front with rent stabilized buildings, then that's like a ray of hope. Hopefully that, because in my vision, well, I guess, core belief is that real estate should not be a business, and that it boils my blood that real estate is treated as a business. If you notice, most people who get into real estate as a business are the most plain, boring people. You wouldn't even want to spend 10 minutes with them in the same room. And so the other ray of hope is that in the past 20 years, there's been a growth of community land trusts. Like 20 years ago, there's only a few, and now there's more than a few. And so that should be another ray of hope.
Yes, I think community land trusts are a great thing. I think they need some degree of regulation so that we don't get excessive self-selection of fairly prosperous people grabbing an asset, which has happened elsewhere. You just have to regulate that. It doesn't mean you don't do it. It's just, you got to manage the process carefully. But when they did the reforms, the tenant reforms a few years back, big real estate was all complaining, oh my God, we won't be able to maintain these rent stabilized buildings. Oh no, what do we do? And, I think some of the New York State Senator Liz Kruger said, well, yeah, stop, no, you can't gentrify these buildings up the wazoo, because your idea of maintenance is to gentrify them with a higher paying tenancy. And what we see is, yeah, a lot of buildings are going to be a little shabbier. But if the heat's on and the elevator's working and there's no rats and the water's, keep it functioning, a non-gentrified city is going to look a little shabbier. And that's okay. That is definitely okay. And I think that people have gotten so used to the look of gentrified New York, they kind of forget what it was like in the late 60s, early 70s, when everything was falling apart. And it was still a great city. A great city can have poor people too, who can't gentrify their building up the wazoo. Like, that vision of an excessively gentrified city full of rich people where we, because that is the real estate vision, is we got to get rid of the poor people, poor being anybody less than, I don't know, $300,000 a year, get rid of them so we can have all the rich here. So we have to transform the housing for the rich. And I mean, that's the plan. It's time to stop that plan, and they keep bringing it up in different forms, using different words, different reasons why they have to do it. And
Caitlin?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Alex, did you want to?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to thank Lynn really quickly for bringing up the need for some light or / minor regulation with community land trust, because you have the right idea for, making the integrity what it should be. So I see Caitlin has her hand up.
Yeah. Caitlin?
Yeah. Hi, Lynn. Thank you. Good to see you, and congratulations. Looking forward to your book. And I feel like it feels really important right now with the city of yes. I feel like in New York, people are just starting to wrap their heads around the impact of city of yes on their communities. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I don't know if you've done an analysis of it, but just last night, some of us were on a webinar specifically about Related's proposal to demolish Fulton and Elliott-Chelsea houses. And now one of the alternatives in the proposal that they can then circumvent and not go through the ULURP process is because of City of Yes. And so I think we all have to watch this, because it's again kind of cutting. It sounds like, your analysis is about obviating any kind of regulation, right? The deregulation, commodification, globalization of real estate, that's part of the financialization of housing. And so City of Yes is that, right, on steroids, and has implications for every community. And yet I feel like there hasn't been a really cogent takedown of City of Yes in a more public forum. So we're all just kind of seeing it all, now for our community, and specifically for looking at the impact on NYCHA campuses. And I guess I also, just like when I was hearing you talk about gentrification, I felt like I was starting to, feel the flames of like, just about, the kind of the class race, the ways in which racial capitalism, right, is then part of this overall infrastructure. And so kind of calling it out. And that's why I do think the Zohran Mamdani win is something, and yet we have yet to, see how it'll actually impact housing, since his main issue has been freeze the rent. But that's just, that's really important. And of course, last night, the rent guideline boards went, they voted to increase it, but for rent stabilized, but, really, thinking about public housing and about also those who are kind of left to try and navigate the market rate housing. Anyways, blah 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 blah. I'm just going on and on, but I would love to hear your analysis of City of Yes. I would love for all of us to do a kind of have deeper conversations and think about that impact.
Well, City of Yes is taking a fire hose to the regulatory framework around real estate across different city agencies. The sneaky way that they pull it off, I mean, there's a couple ways that they pulled it off. You know, one is that they throw in some good things and they emphasize the good things, like, oh my God, we shouldn't have parking requirements, you know, like, yeah, no parking requirements has been an ask forever. Like, you know, that's like a no-brainer, but it's a good thing. We don't need parking requirements to build. But so they throw that in, and then they emphasize that. And then, you know, they emphasize like a bakery is going to succeed now on the second floor. They put in all this stuff, and it succeeds. It succeeds because we have an ignorant citizenry who is not awake to the takeover of the city. And they win. They won. Let me just say, they won. City of Yes passed. Yes, there's a lawsuit, but you know, we know how those goes. I don't mean to be cynical about lawsuits, since I've been involved in quite a few and paid money into quite a few, always on the losing end. So I feel a little bit like, you know, I can't do that anymore. But they won. So to me, it's much more revolutionary in the sense that, you know, we need, you know, and to be honest, I don't think Mamdani is it on this particular front. I feel like the DSA, who I know fairly well, I feel like the DSA has been infiltrated excessively by sort of a YIMBY ideology, abundance ideology, an Ed Glazer ideology of build, baby, build. Like, the problem is a shortage of housing. The problem is not really a shortage of housing. Yes, we need to build. Of course we need to build, but you know, New York is built out already. It literally is built out. So if you're going to build something in New York, in most cases, you have to demolish something first. Robert Moses recognized that fact in like 1935. So, you know, so who gets the wrecking ball?
Yeah.
Who gets the, where are we going to aim it? You know, and that's now a political factor. And, you know, so, and the real big real estate wants the wrecking ball in the historic core. Why do they want the wrecking ball in the historic core? Because that's where the transit is. They don't want to build in the, I mean, they will build, and they are building, and they are speculating in the outer boroughs. But the big money for them is in the historic core, which includes Brooklyn and a little bit of Queens, not much, the waterfront now. And that's what they want, because it's all accessible to Grand Central, it's accessible to Penn Station, accessible to Lower Manhattan, it's accessible to Midtown. That's what they want. And, you know, I think that to fight City of Yes at this point, I mean, I'm just strategically, I don't know how to win that unless we have a mayor who gets the point that it's not right, that it's wrong for the city, that deregulation, the fire hose of deregulation, is not the solution to the problem. We need regulation. Capitalism creates massive problems.
Yeah.
Capitalism also lays golden eggs. It's a dragon. It lays golden eggs, it breathes fire at the same time. How do we control it? You know, we can kill the dragon, then we don't get the golden eggs, we don't get the fire, then we don't, you know, okay, so we don't get the fire, but we don't have the golden eggs. You know, regulating capitalism, that's kind of where I come in. I'm thinking, well, we need a better system for how we regulate our capitalism. You know, I'm a small scale capitalism kind of person, but we need a mayor with a vision about that. And, you know, I feel like, can we get to Mamdani about that? Can we talk to him? I don't think so. I think he's already gotten talked to by the YIMBY people. Freezing rents, we've done it before. It works on the 1 million stabilized units. In my book, I call for a legal change so that all rents, there's no such thing as a market rent, that every rental unit in New York should be stabilized. What kind of society allows a landlord to raise the rent infinitely at will on the market rate part of the market? That's insane. That's ridiculous. You know,
I love your philosophy there, Lynn. Can I send you the City of Yes paperwork and have you review it? Would you like to?
Yes, please do. I follow George Janes quite a bit on this. He's a good friend of mine.
Okay.
And George and I have talked a lot about City of Yes as it was going through the system. And I mean, the problem is I felt like as it was navigating the approval by the mayor and the city council, I felt like it was a done deal.
Yeah.
Which I think it turned out to be,
Yeah, to your point, that's why they want NYCHA. I do have to get to Viren, but I see Caitlin, that's a new hand, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if I can say one thing.
Sure.
Is that okay? I feel like, I mean, City of Yes is this kind of, it's like a complex platform of around, upzoning the city. And I think that for, most New Yorkers, upzoning, like in all the kind of techno jargon, and Sam Stein talks about the kind of plan-splaining, right? That happens. It's kind of this, it's complex. But what isn't complex is that there is this kind of structural racism, this kind of racist upzonings, like connecting that techno analysis, right, to the displacement of poor working class communities of color. And I feel like we can kind of get into all of the kind of tools of trying to kind of understand it. And then on the other hand, I think we can just call it for what it is, because we already know that it's happening. And I feel like kind of connecting those dots to your communities being upzoned. This is about the displacement of poor working class communities of color, right?
Yeah,
and
they just want towers.
right?
They want towers and to get rid of poorer people. That's it.
Yeah. And I think we just have to kind of hold that, and because already, people in communities know it, right? But then how do we, have a kind of clear, something that we can all get behind without having to kind of be technical experts around it, is, I guess, my point.
I agree.
Yeah, it's
really a good message.
Yeah, Lynn, I hope you stick around. Viren has been talking about the mixed use plan. I think you probably will find that interesting. And I would love for you to be involved. And we've been talking about a community housing meeting, and I've got some very interesting people that want to be involved in that. Damu and I have been talking about this, but I think what we need to do is write a statement of purpose, and then we can kind of come together. I've also been meeting with Chris Marte on his meetings about development in the city, and I think he wants to look at a broad perspective of development. So I'm trying to see where that goes to. Chris Marte is one of our genuine council people, as Chris Banks. I find him wonderfully important to our cause, and I think those we got to find those people and support them and get behind them. And I think we all need to embrace, kind of urge, get behind Mamdani if he supports what we're doing. And of course, he's talking the right language, but let's make him follow through with that right language. So I'm kind of hopeful that we can communicate with him, and we'll see where that goes. So with that, I'm going to unpin you and I'm going to ask Viren to join us here. Viren, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't leave me. I'm sorry. This was, I don't know if you saw the beginning, but Lynn put together a nice little slide and talked about her book. But go ahead, Viren, it's your let me just pin you and go right ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks. It was good listening to Lynn. I actually heard the entire presentation. I mean, just going back to the city of Yes, I call it the city of mess in this kind of a provocative way, because it has good things in it. It's been peppered with everything that might appeal to you, but at the same time, the sort of community disengagement is very, very problematic to such an extent. Somebody gave an example of what is being proposed at NYCHA for no ULURP or no zoning boundaries being sort of applied. option that they've put together, that actually even puts aside the role of city council and city council members, which is quite provocative when you think about it. So it's not only just the community is being pushed aside through some of those sort of mechanisms, but it also takes away the sort of political entities who may or may not have positive or negative role in shaping how how the community works with many of these proposed plans. So now I enjoyed that, and nice to meet you, Lynn. And hopefully we'll meet again sometime. I teach at a number of different places, including Columbia and City College, so maybe it'll be interesting to connect sometime if that is possible. Going back to Midtown South, it's a kind of multi-headed monster. Everything is likable in it, just the way a city of yes might make you feel. The problem is, where do you look, where do you sort of place community engagement? Where do you place cultural engagement? How do you define culture? How do you define cultural displacements? When I say cultural displacement, what I'm trying to explain to you is the grittiness, the sort of robustness of how city fabrics come together. Aldo Rossi some years ago wrote a fantastic book called Architecture of City. And in that, in his introduction, he describes New York City as a city of monuments. And I've failed to understand that because New York City, in more ways than one, is at the forefront of sort of defining technology, innovation, changing things. Some of the most beautiful bridges and structures have been built here. And then I understood what he meant, that there's a footprint of the city that basically defines the fabric character. Now, that character is unchangeable. And he actually calls it a footprint, that grid, whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. When you ungrid the city, just the way Robert Moses started doing, you created this jointed fabric. Similarly, when we actually look at how the same fabric is going to be punctuated vertically up, that is going to change the manner in which the lower fabric would work. So in other words, density doesn't have to translate into tall buildings. You can have high density, low-rise buildings. You may not get 5,000 units, but you may get 4,500 units, 4,200 units. It becomes a design problem. Lynn talked about Corbusier. And Corbusier was a remarkable thinker. His ideas came from a place which belongs in history, particularly the 1930s and 40s. During that time, because of the war and because of pandemics, I think they were called epidemics, there was a need to change the way architecture kind of engaged with community life and health. Housing was required to be built for two reasons. One, there was poor housing quality, which required to be changed from health point of view. The second part was they were looking at building more housing for returning war veterans. So he had a formula, and that formula was quite effective to build quickly. Whether it was for permanence or not is besides the point. And yes, it did clean up quite a lot of historical fabric that, as we know, we value today. Robert Moses actually follows in those footsteps, and that's where the problem comes about. Post 1950s, when that approach gets weaponized, used to serve a particular purpose, what you get is that sort of disconnect. And that did happen in New York City, particularly with NYCHA and Michelama and co-op housing that came about, which basically Tower in the Park approach was put in place and used, not so much to produce more housing, but to clean up, to push people in different places to warehouse poverty, so to speak. Now, I'm going to stop here. That was just my little comment on the city of yes is quite remarkably challenging, but it's quite remarkably stupid at the same time. And that's where it becomes problematic. There's a beautiful article. If I can find it, I will actually send it to you, John, and you should share it with other people. It's very remarkably written. It's very balanced. I'm not a no density guy. I'm not a no modern guy, but I am looking for sensible city. city that we can actually appreciate, city we can walk through, et cetera, et cetera. Let me just jump into my quick points on Midtown South Mixed-Use Plan, which is basically looking at 42 blocks and predominantly sort of manufacturing zoned land that they want to change because they want to make it 24/7 neighborhood, and they want to increase the housing, they want to increase density. And I think that's a noble cause. I think that's something that does make sense. When you increase supply, you can actually potentially decrease costs, because when supply is higher, potentially that can actually happen. Like Karl Marx says, that doesn't unfortunately happen in a place like New York City, because sometimes when you increase supply, the demand doesn't stop in a place which is actually kind of a magnet for a number of people to come to, so that that flow continues. If New York City has increased by 1 million people in the past couple of decades, that's a pretty big jump when you think about it. When you think about it, 1889, when within 1 year's time, 1 million people came to New York City, that tells you that city actually goes through these various fluxes, depending on what is happening where and how. The flows change. And that is something that this plan fails to appreciate completely. It does appreciate in terms of, yes, we need more housing, but it fails to appreciate that there are places where you do it, there are ways in which you do it. It's a design problem. It's not simply a density problem. So one thing that I'm going to say is that it does demonstrate forward-thinking ambition. It does require deeper transformative commitments, both from the community in New York City as well as professionals like me, but not at the expense of equity, sustainability, and future readiness. What do I mean by that? When you displace cultural sort of characters of spaces that get defined in 3 or 4 different ways. There is the button district, there is the fashion district, there is the fashion avenue, there is flower district, you name it. All these names mean a lot to a lot of New Yorkers who live around here. And yes, catching up with 21st century is potentially very, what do you call it, attractive idea, but at what cost, and how do we get there without losing what we have? And that's where reimagining cities should support that sort of approach, where life itself, spatial justice itself, resilience are also sort of taken into account fairly quickly. So I have broken it up into sort of roughly about 7 points. And then I break it down to 10 points. So the first point that I'm making is equitability, from market-driven to people-driven development. How do you make MSMX prioritize housing by the same time with stronger guidelines that are implemented? So in other words, how do you look at rezonings in Manhattan where affordability is the goal, but not causing tremendous amount of displacement and following the sort of real estate guidelines? Challenges affordability, we understand that. Under current inclusionary zoning, it is often, sorry, somebody's coming in. Under current inclusionary zoning is often out of reach for the most people who are at the sort of receiving end of housing insecurity. Existing industrial jobs, often held by working class, immigrant, and unionized communities, may be displaced without sufficient protections. Mixed-use development tends to favor luxury housing and upscale retail unless specifically regulated otherwise. So what are the recommendations that I would put forward? Guarantee deeply affordable housing for low and extremely low income residents, that is below 30% AMI, not just middle income tiers. Now, do I also believe that there's a huge need for middle income tier housing? Absolutely, there is, but not at the cost of displacing the lower end people first, which is what is being done. The less Let's focus on what is required to be done, and in the process, lose what we don't give a damn about. And that's where the problem is. Preserving and upgrading light manufacturing zones within the plan to protect blue-collar employment. Why is it required? It's a working city. We had a working waterfront. We changed that for good reasons, and nobody's complaining about it. But low-end, low-impact manufacturing within the city fabric is something that we can actually live with, and we should actually retain that, because you want that sort of life, culture, and work composition to stay alive. This is a working city. Last point I'm making is strengthen anti-displacement tools such as right to return policies, tenant protections, and community land trusts. We just heard a conversation on community land trusts. Those are quite remarkable mechanisms that are potentially available. How you design them, how you put them to work is something that, again, is, in my definition, is a design problem worth looking into. Embed community benefit agreements, which I think they're called CBAs, and ongoing community governance to ensure local voices shape outcomes. That is something else which is also significantly important for the plan to do. Sustainability, from green facades to ecological urbanism, we can talk about this. These are very fashionable terms. These are actually required by law. I don't even know why we need to speak about it, because you need to do it. There's no option. In fact, the law requires anytime you change anything, potentially, you're required to go through all these changes. I'm not even going to spend too much time on it because it's the law. Recommendations, I can make quite a few, require net zero energy buildings. I think that's quite amazingly possible and quite amazingly doable. I think so we could ask for those kind of issues much more when we speak about sustainability. Sustainability is simply product-based approach, in the sense that use these materials, you do this, do that, spend money here, get platinum status. Those are not going to change much. But if you speak about how do you integrate urban ecology, native plantings, green routes, stormwater capture, how do you actually even work towards fixing New York City's completely screwed up CSO issue? But how do you start actually taking out 1% of every project, every project budget to be used towards putting second parallel line, so that eventually in 20 years' time, we might have a potentially sort of separated sewer line, which we need so badly. So urban ecology for me is extremely important. Public space and climate adaptation, all of that is completely necessary to be done. A lot of it is required by law, but some of it is not required by law. For example, the idea of urban ecology is more philosophical and sort of design focused than sort of what is required by code. So one needs to go beyond what is required by code and do something, keeping in mind that we are not going towards 21st century, we are in it. We are 25 years in it. So let's just focus on 22nd century and do something that is kind of more future-proofed. So that's the next topic that I actually want to speak about. But how do you make it future-proof? How do you make New York City more 22nd century ready while working through this particular next few decades? Zoning is historically flawed. We know that. Zoning was and is one of the mechanisms by which, just the way Lynn was describing to you, it is actually designed to control. It is designed to segregate. It is designed to empower, but only a few. It is designed to be broken up into different segments. So the segments that actually politically are more active, financially more stable, or have the sort of political push, are the ones that the zoning kind of focuses on. So why FAR 12 or FAR 18 or FAR 30 in Midtown Manhattan is okay, and now Brooklyn is fighting for similar sort of measures. Why is it not okay for other places where there's a higher FAR potentially available? Am I saying go for higher FAR? No, I'm saying that as you know, some folks might have read the book Color of Law, which talks about it, that it's actually completely color tainted. So in other words, we have used zoning to divide, not to connect. So New York City has to look at that fairly quickly. How do we sort of take away the rigidity? How do we sort of rework the land use that has become obsolete? How do we rework that? Now, if you look at City of Yes, it comes and tells you that, oh, exactly what you're asking for is what we are doing. How are we doing it? That still remains a question. So yes, City of Yes has noble intent, but its application is actually still being weaponized to serve the purposes of a few. Economic development strategies often fail to account for automation, AI, and shifting labor markets. We talk about a lot of these amazing ideas, and when the time comes that we can actually bring them home. So in other words, how can we look at the sort of current productive landscape of Fashion District or Midtown South? How do we actually apply that? How do we change that? How do we actually make it more revenue producing strategy? And how do we actually bring that into design so that without displacement and without even losing density, you can add density, I have no problem with it. How do you add what, and at what mechanisms do you keep in place for preservation of what you have? That's where the sort of disconnect lies. So there are many other sort of adaptive zoning codes that people can sort of think about for flexible use, modular architecture, changing occupancy types, inclusive innovation hubs, planning for integrated living, the way we talk about live, work, and I add the third one, live, work, and play. And I think that is potentially possible. This is one of the places where hybrid morphologies and hybrid zoning and hybrid building code and hybrid land use would allow you to actually flourish much more than you otherwise would. If you break it down and make it purely housing focused, that will be a complete loss of what this entire district actually stands for. So hybridity is something that I would keep in place in a sort of remarkable way. Last but not the least, intergenerational living. That is something that New York City must learn fairly quickly about, because we actually, when you look at demographics of New York City and look at the age groups, those age groups are extremely important. I have some projects that I do now in India, and I was shocked to actually learn more than 65% of the people are below the age of 35. Where are the grandmothers and grandfathers gone? And when that happens, what does it do? It takes away the entire joy of learning and teaching and connecting with the sort of knowledge of the past generations. I have learned the most I've learned. I mean, my students sometimes ask me, which school do you like the most? I said, two schools that I've learned the most from. One was my grandmother, and the second one is New York City. And I think that's the beauty of how do you retain what you have and how do you sort of multiply what you have. We can speak about digital equity, we can talk about broadband, we can talk about accessibility to digital public service. Why am I bringing that up now? Because of sort of disconnect, many of this, what do you call them? The folks who live in Flower District and Fashion District are disconnected from. You need to bring that back. And if I sound jumpy, it's also because I'm trying to keep a track of all the points I want to make. But going back to my whole point of intergenerational is way much more important in my book than digital connect, because digital connect will happen. People will figure that out. But if you don't have sort of previous generation from whom you can learn, there's a big disconnect that we should sort of think about quite carefully. Public domain, public REM, what we call public commons and cultural commons, and the sort of places where we meet and learn from each other, the civic infrastructure. Those are other sort of important points to keep in mind, which if you look at the plan doesn't really define that fairly clearly. Flaws that I see mostly in Midtown South mixed-use plan, vagueness. There is a lot of conversation about affordable housing, but the definition of affordable housing is absolutely vague. It doesn't tell you that you will be required to make 80% or even 100% of AMI to be able to qualify for affordable housing in that zone. If you made that kind of money, you can very easily get mortgage without any impact. But people who make below 50%, below 40%, below 60%, even below 70% are actually in more trouble than people quite recognize. They speak of middle income housing that has to become affordable, but for them, that middle income housing actually falls under the sort of zone of 80 to 90% REM. I actually fight with my own community board all the time about changing the AMI definition because it is non-equitable. It applies to entire New York City, and New York City is not equal. Every district is not equal. So what may be affordable on the basis of AMI may not apply in particular places equally. So in other words, I have students sometimes they graduated, they take a first job. The first job is $40,000, $50,000. They want to live in Chelsea. They want to live in Hell's Kitchen. They can't afford to even live here by paying rent. So that's something that deeper affordability measures had to be put in place and guaranteed. Gentrification is not a bad word. Gentrification could be good. But gentrification without displacement could be even better. So how do you manage that? Those two is always a problem. It's happening in Williamsburg. It's happening in Chinatown. It's happening now. It's going to even happen in Red Hook, where displacement is going to drive sort of design much more than the other way around. And every place where you have any leftover FAR or any leftover potential and any proximity to water is actually determining how zoning is going to push down your throats to create this sort of more of displacement and change many of the industrial fabrics, which potentially are very important now. So if you go to Sunset Park, if you go to Red Hook, it is a productive landscape. It is a sort of performative space. It is a performative waterfront. It is a working waterfront. But all of that will begin to change the moment you change the type of people who begin to live there. So those displacement issues is something that folks really have to pay attention to. Insufficient, I'm going to move to the next point, the insufficient anti-displacement protection. How do you do that? How do you make sure? How do you put in place preservation? Does the plan show that, explain that, even discuss it? Not at all. And that is the problem. And that is a big flaw as well, because gentrification pressure will likely rise without rent stabilization extensions or tenant protections or particular sort of what I call not exactly land use protection, but they call use protections in other words. So if you have a particular kind of production space that you use, how do you make sure that you can retain that as a production space without losing it? So next point that I'm going to talk about is over-reliance on market-driven development. There is a lot of need for housing. There is a lot of money that can be put into housing. There is a lot of money to be made when you actually look at housing. So if you look at Related being extremely interested in Section 8 housing, it doesn't surprise me. They actually buy projects or housing sites in Hell's Kitchen and Midtown because there's a lot of money to be made. So it is being controlled and driven by folks who actually have the capital. it is not what in the past it used to be the other way around. When you talked about affordable housing, you went to smaller groups, and HPD would put out a little RFP. Nobody else would even pay attention. Related will even never even look at it. But now, related type of developers, nothing against related. I think they're good developers and they do what they need to do. That's their job. But at the same time, community's job is to make sure that we retain what we have. I'm not a preservationist, but preserving particular community character and community's voice is extremely important as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to talk too much about some of the other stuff that is sort of worth focusing on. I can actually share that information with John, and you can probably send it around if you like. I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that, Viren.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we have a lot of other conversations too. And I think, don't you think when it comes to related, they're paying attention to public housing because there's nothing left in the city to develop? And would you agree with that?
Yes, what is known as the beautiful forget the title of it. Community assets is a very intriguing sort of database that MAS has put together. There are a bunch of other sort of smaller non-public, they're public, but they're not owned by the city kind of organizations that do a lot of studies. And they have identified places which have the potential, and they're not just the public housing alone, but public housing is a major chunk of it. And because there's two things that work with public housing. Number one, very attractive land parcels. Majority of them are in waterfront locations. Even Donald Trump wanted to buy Smith houses, and he wanted to buy Astoria houses, and every waterfront location he wanted to buy. So you can imagine that sort of intrigue is always there because there's a lot of money to be made. The second thing is it has underutilized FAR. In other words, you have ample FAR that you can use, so that makes it even more attractive. Lastly, nobody likes public housing. That's the sort of very tragic situation that we are in. Public housing in New York City is actually should be looked at as a great resource, as a public resource, as a sort of empowering resource, because that's what city can hold on to and say, well, yes, we want to do it. What you guys are asking for, let's do it. But let's do it through community engagement. Let's put in place preservation strategies. Let's see if we can double it, but not triple it. You guys want to triple it. We say that we are happy with doubling it. And if you double it, you preserve what you have, you retain the community character, you engage the communities, you actually make the lives more sort of, how do I say it, more livable, because that is required to be done. But yes, there is that focus. Now, if you look at Lenox Terrace in Harlem, and if you look at, not Lincoln, there is another project next door. These are all Michelama developments. They're now all of them are being bought over by private developers. Why? Because there is money to be made. There are 4 corners which are empty. We're going to put new market rate housing. Do I have anything against it? No, sir. I have nothing against that. How do you do it? Why do you have to do it all? Or how do you actually densify without compromising quality of housing and quality of life for majority of people?
Well, I think when it comes to public housing, I've walked through those campuses and that's life. I mean, you got lots of greenery, you got places to sit. I can visualize, improving upon it and making that a mainstay. I can, where communities come together. I don't see densifying it. And Damu has a question, and we're running a little late.
I know.
You've got so much to say, and I'm always enthralled by what you have to say. But we do have a few comments, and I'm sure Renee wants to chime in here. Damu, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, Viren has explained the Midtown South mixed-use development in a great detail. I agree with all of that, all of those things. I was looking at the Midtown South also as I was working on my Broadway Linear Park campaign, which passes through the Midtown South. And we looked at that. There's no environmental impact statement, which is made by the community, by the planning about the Midtown South, MSMX. And there's not any public open spaces identified there. And there's the public realm is very, very limited. And the interior and exterior public realm would be very important to do. So at some point, I'd like to make a presentation of what we have been campaigning for Midtown, for the Broadway Linear Park, which is a car-free Broadway from Columbus Circle to Union Square. And that will become a public space for the people who are in Midtown. So that'll be like bicycles and people, and of course, all the plazas, etc., developed to a point that, as Viren talked about fashion district, about Times Square and other areas. So they become like isolated little spaces. Rather than isolated spaces, they could be connected of the big connect from Union Square to Central Park. So whatever you experience in Times Square doesn't just be limited to Times Square, and the rest of the things go exactly all the shared streets that the DOT has been proposing in many areas. They already had done some work, but the vision, but there's no vision I've seen from DOT other than individual block after block after block. They are talking about doing some design work there, but it's all mixed use. So the people are, what happens is that people are afraid of bicyclists. Bicyclists are afraid of the cars, and everybody's afraid of everything. So you cannot really be enjoying the mixed use for the Broadway that has been proposed by DOT. Anytime you want to like linger there, cross the area, cross the street there, is kind of like a little scary thing because you don't know whether you should be looking to the right or looking to the left. Suddenly a bicycle comes so close to you and you kind of start to lose your balance. So the least efficient use of the streets in New York is Broadway, as many of you may have noticed that whether you're walking or driving there, after every few blocks you have to detour and then you can come back on Broadway, which makes absolutely no sense. We've done studies on that. We have done the numbers on that. So speaking of also going back to MSMX proposal, the heat index in the Midtown is like 8 degrees more than the average in New York City. So on a sunny day in July or August or anything, you feel that as if the heat is kind of hitting you. You're being attacked by the black tar, which is absorbing the heat from the sun and then is radiating all around it. So those are the kind of things we need to look at. And of course, the ecological aspect that Viren talked about, that's also very important. So I'll just stop at that one because I'd like to make a presentation to this group at some point when it's convenient. But other thing, before I leave, I wanted to also talk about the public housing areas, which of course also have studied that. And when we talk about the towers in the park was kind of very important aspect of the park. And that park has been isolated to become only accessible to the people who live in the public housing. It's not open for many reasons, is not open to the rest of the New York City. And a lot of times is a safety and security reason that you observe. So we did a presentation at one of AIA conference was about Jefferson houses. And we met with the communities living in Jefferson houses and how they can make their Jefferson houses more usable to the people who already live there. I did a paper also on Mars Haven in the Bronx, again, short of public spaces in general, but not counting the open spaces around the public housing. So when you open that up to the community at large who lives in the neighborhood, then you can actually start to meet the the requirement that we have to have so many square feet for the population in the area. So I think those are the kind of things been looked at in isolation. They should be looked at a bigger scale in the
So they have,
citywide.
yeah, well, they
Oh,
have to be
oh,
looked at, they have to be looked at collectively. I mean, there's a whole conversation that Cedric Price used to have, that the whole idea of breathing city, because when you actually take away all the trees that you have currently available to you, of course you can replant them, but it's going to take 20 more years to get them back to that shape. And you are taking away the sort of lungs of the city. So I'm going back to John's point. Yes, public housing is not just simply land to build on, but it's also the land to live on. It's a land to sort of collect on. It's a land to breathe on. I think that those are the points that we completely miss. We had a
well, at the same time also, since I was talking about Broadway, there's no reason why Broadway could not be Champs-Élysées, or why Broadway Linear Park cannot be like the High Line, which has been so popular and is kind of created opportunities for new developments around it. Of course, MSMX is already part of the development we are talking about it. So yes, so indoor, outdoor public spaces in the summertime, especially. Why do people have to always be sitting on a bench and trying to find a little shade? Why could they not be accessing the building? So that'd be like a public use, a public benefit, which is something that the new buildings, the new development can provide a public benefit. Anyway, so I will stop here because you're running late. Thank you for
Yeah.
listening to me.
No, Damu, that's great. And I think I might have some time next month for your presentation, by the way. And as far as I'll take on two more. I do have an agenda item that Luana wanted to talk about what they're actually doing over there. They're, with a document, and she wants to discuss a document. So I do want to get to that, and we're already running late. So Robert, if you can make it really snippy and short, and then we'll get to Renee, and then we'll close this out and maybe make some plans for Viren to come back.
So this will be quick, folks. I happen to be in the airport about to make a trip to Georgia, but it was interesting listening to Viren, Lynn, and Donna and everybody just discuss. John has been talking about a housing summit, something we did last year. I'm going to challenge this group to come together, and maybe we need a pre-meeting. But what is the community plan? I think I hear a lot of problems about what's wrong, but what I don't get from our movements and from our groups on the ground is an alternative plan. And that's what we need to construct. We also need to figure out how to build more power, because development rules this city. And until we realize that, developers have the elected officials in their pocket. Until we get more people like Mamdani, who sees the world differently, we're going to have problems in this city. I'll end right there.
Yeah, Rob, I'm sorry, I overlooked that was you. You can have all the time you ever want. But anyway, yeah, that's exactly what Lynn expressed. Thank you for that. Any comment to follow up? Everybody agrees with that, right?
I agree. I totally agree. Yes.
Okay. I think we should take Rob's challenge up, and I'm going to make that a priority.
Just let me
Let's just
share
go-
quickly with Viren that Viren, I teach in a program at the New School. It's a master's degree program called Design in Urban Ecology. I
Sounds
know
extremely good.
you had some criticisms of that, but we'll talk. We'll talk about that in the future.
Sounds good.
Very good. Renee, you've got the floor.
Okay, so some of it is we do NYCHA development, all people come in here all the time. I don't think people realizes that. We had children from the Avenue. Of course, part of that problem is they started taking over. And so the domino players, who are irregular people, who go down every day, ended up being displaced into the backyard. Part of the problem. People never seem to realize there are other people who live here. But we have people coming in and out. They sit there, they have lunch, they bring their children into the parks. They do all that all the time. If you went down to Reese houses, you would see other people walking through the NYCHA developments, walking around it, running around it, sitting in it. So yes, in many cases, it might be isolated, it might not be. But that's a choice people have made. And in some cases, it's a false choice. It's not that we don't welcome you, It's that people come and displace. So the space is there for everyone. I mean, if you want to talk about that, you talk about other places around here who aren't as open as we are. And that's part of the problem. People have this attitude about what NYCHA is. And, we don't open spaces, and spaces only for NYCHA people. But if you're the ones who have to pay for it, then we have a problem because the city doesn't pay for it if something goes wrong. So with that, you're going to have to figure that the city is going to have to expend, or the classes or the students from the avenues would have to, if something goes wrong in that part, who's paying for it? Those are things you have to also calculate as well. And also, do the residents get displaced? Because that's what happens as well. So unless everyone's going to be in and helping support NYCHA development, then you're going to have to wonder, do we open it up to everyone? In some cases, in Jefferson houses, there are other people in there. I already know about concrete safaris and the gardening program. People walk in and out of NYCHA developments all the time. So we also need to stop that attitude that it's only for some people and we don't welcome. We are, frankly, that may have been part of what's done us in. And also,
Renee,
What do you mean, Jeff? Say that again?
Renee, quickly, Renee, I wanted to just mention that the reason I was saying that is because often those NYCHA developments have a fenced open spaces, and those fences are along the street line, which is kind of a big, like, okay, this is a private space, don't enter because it's all been fenced in. So that's the reason that kind of a sense comes. And I'm not knocking down going in there. I'm perfectly happy to be walking through there, no problem at all. And a lot of times, this can also be designed, could be like connecting the open spaces from one block to the next block to the next block, and that creating a better urban ecology, a park-like scene that everyone can go and enjoy, which is a similar thing that I talked about, the Broadway Linear Park. Continue to make it into a large public space where you can just keep walking and going through.
Tom,
So
I'm going
those
to
are
interrupt you because I think what point Renee is making is actually quite remarkable. I'll tell you why. It's actually by design. The parks, the open spaces in NYCHA actually designed by keeping, believe it or not, by keeping NYPD as partners, because they would determine how the routes must be actually controlled. And that's very unfortunate. But Renee's point is quite remarkably important. If we keep looking at NYCHA as NYCHA problem, then we have a problem, significant problem. But if we look at NYCHA as part of the community, and if there is a connection between the two, then the situation might change. I don't mean connection only in terms of walking through or playing in the playground. That is significantly important too. But sometimes, depending on what it might be required, you could even potentially increase more affordable housing or even Section 9 housing. Why not? Why can't we build a bit more of Section 9 housing too? Because we need it. We got deficit for even Section 9 housing or even Section 8 housing that you want to build there. Yes, certainly, but not at the expense of what you potentially already have there. So I think some sort of connection between the two is absolutely required. NYCHA is NYCHA, Chelsea is Chelsea. That is a very, very bad approach. Or public housing is public housing, and New York City doesn't have much to do with it. New York City doesn't want to go there. The pedestrians don't walk through there. That is the disconnect that actually perpetuates that problem.
I see the
Well,
great.
actually, walking through Jefferson houses and other areas around it, you see that police cameras up there on mobile units, and then you're surrounded by that. So of course, that why do I want to be observed when I'm walking through certain area? But I totally agree with you. I accept that is about the keeping security and all of those things. But Renee, last month, you talked about Regulation 964. That was a great regulation. And I would think after reading through that, I'm wondering, why could we not use the regulation 964 back into NYCHA housing? So I really like to have a dialogue with Renee offline some point whenever it's available, whenever Renee has time. Would like to go to that because there's so much information and the research and history that Renee, you can share, which will be very helpful in modifying and thinking through
Yeah, that sounds I'll put you guys together if you don't have emails, if you don't have each other's emails. I think the green spaces could be a very connective strand too. I agree. I think the green spaces are very important, and they can connect us all, and it might catch on. It might catch on with us.
I like to bring it to also to my class that I hope to be teaching in the fall at City College. So will be useful, that information. Then I can certainly have a lot more people thinking about it. So I think it'll be very helpful if I can connect with Renee.
Sure, and we can put this on the agenda next month too, as well, if you like.
There's just one thing I'd like to add.
Sure.
We are in a heavily surveillance society, and every NYCHA development is different. So some may have those cameras all the way around and some don't. So everything, as I always say, everything has to be taken in the individual sense. So what's happening one place doesn't mean it's happening in another place, but we are in a heavily surveilled society. And so we always have to remember we are being watched wherever we are at. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's one
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, and there's one goal in mind. They want to profit and they want to own the property. So there's a lot of strings there, a lot of things to discuss, and I appreciate this conversation, but I do need to wrap this up, and I apologize if I cut anyone off or shorten anybody's. But I think Luana has a bit of important information she wants to talk about, and we have a 10:30 meeting following this, so I really have to move on. Viren, wonderful. Damu, thank you for your input. Renee, everybody else, Caitlin, and I think what was important from last night's webinar is the change, what they're proposing to change the green spaces. Some are cutting the green spaces off and stopping the flow of green spaces from one building to the other. So I think the green spaces is a good conversation to have. Anybody want to second that and want to have that on for next month? Okay. Anyway, Luana, are you still with us? Luana? Oh, she's out for coffee. She got tired of waiting.
No, I'm here. I'm just having problems with my computer. I really am.
Okay.
Am I muted? You
No,
can hear
no, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay, because I'm having trouble with this computer. I don't know if it's too hard or not. But really quickly, I don't want to hold everybody up. We're already over time.
Your
So
face is
I'll just mention it really quickly. And then I don't know what happened to my camera.
There you go.
But anyway, I just want to say, with the conversations that we have on public housing, that we have to stop the conversations in regards to the stereotypical titles and conversation that we're having with NYCHA. There's a lot of stereotypical elements to what we're talking about the people that live in New York City housing. And I think that's part of the problem, is that there are stereotypes associated with NYCHA, which are not necessarily true. So that's my comment on the previous discussion. Really quickly.
You didn't hear that here, though.
Really quickly, I won't go into the full details of what happened. I will just give you a quick synopsis of what the tenants in the As of Right building, the senior building over the Hudson Gill, has been experiencing in regards to their displacement. I would call it displacement. So the tenants received the document. It was dated May 27th, but the document was on their doors in June last month. And the document had deceptive information and hypothetical suppositions within it in regards to how the tenants will be moved to their new location while their buildings are being demolished. The document included words like anticipated, proposed, possibility of receiving federal funds, and they talked about the size of the demolition of the existing buildings and their replacement. If the environmental review is completed and approved, as we know, that's under review right now because they're trying to get away from doing that environmental review. So the letter suggests that the people have an invitation, a voluntary invitation to a survey. The survey is for an apartment lottery. The apartment lottery is to assign the residents to a temporary relocation apartment based on their random lottery number that they will be given. These lottery numbers are being placed in batches. So I don't understand how you have a lottery number that's going to be drawn from a batch. So it suggests to me that there are a number of misconceptions and allusions to getting an apartment through a lottery, but not guaranteed. They say the process is fair. For the first phase, it's impacted residents, usually using a pool of refreshed apartments. So they have 120 renovated apartments that they're supposed to put these residents in. Now the residents will be placed in these apartments based on their tier and their preferences. So the tiers are based on the age, they're based on the request. So if you had a request and it was approved by NYCHA, which they haven't been doing any transfers, if you have a transfer request and have an approval for a transfer request, that will be considered. The households with existing approved active transfer requests or reasonable accommodations requests are supposed to be considered first. That's a tier, that's the first tier. The second tier is for all the households who have an age of 62 or over. So this is a senior building, right? So a senior building is usually 62 or older, right? So that's another misconception. And tier C is for all other households. So all other households, I guess this document, what I got from it was sent to all the residents in both the Fulton complex and the Chelsea senior building, which is the as of right buildings. So I guess the tier C is the all other households. So the assigned numbers of the order of selection within the tier in the order that each household's number is drawn in batches. How can there be an order of selection if they are drawn in batches? You understand what I'm saying? So you have a batch, and then you are supposed to draw from that batch a lottery number. So if you decline the lottery, if you decline to sign on to this survey, if you decline, you may be relocated anywhere because they only have 120 apartments. So that 120 apartments is for both campuses, both Fulton and Elliott. So where are these people going to go? And secondly, they sent this document, which is very intense, to senior citizens, many of whom have trouble even just reading basic, information, because I got this document asking for help as to how to decipher and how to move in reference to it. So you have them trying to, and then, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go fast. So you have the residents now asking to volunteer. If they decline, they will be displaced. They're asked to take this document to the HOU office to fill it out. Fill it out and take it to the HOU office. If they have a question, call or email. We're talking about senior citizens here. This is such a deceptive practice, and it's not a guarantee. They haven't even guaranteed that the people will be placed in a place that will have reasonable accommodations. They say that if you have a preference, that's okay. So the preferences these are the preferences. You have a floor preference, you have a building location, you have a campus location, which is Fulton or Elliott-Chelsea, and you have an apartment size. So those are your sizes. but now you contradict yourself because you're saying that the residents are going to be placed according to their tiers. So these are deceptive measures in which the residents are receiving this information and asked to sign on to a survey. And if they don't, they're going to be displaced. And if they decide later, if they're too late to sign on to the survey, then they're going to have to go back into a pool and to be drawn out again, and they may be placed in it. So my advocacy is this: we have senior citizens in a building that the main building, which is the Hudson Gill, was renovated just recently in the last 2 years. And Renee, you can correct me if I'm wrong in any information. And they spent millions of dollars on this renovation, yet they have apartments that they also have renovated and are used as warehousing. I think we had 470 warehouse apartments, but only 120 of them have been refurbished, and that's in both campuses. So now you're going to take these seniors from a community which they have formed in this particular building and displace them anywhere. And those that don't agree to sign on because they are confused or scared or whatever the situation is will be displaced and placed anywhere. So you're not only going to be displaced, but you may be placed in a location that you haven't agreed to. It may not be in a Fulton or Elliott-Chelsea campus. It may be at another campus. So there is no guarantee with this document. It's a lot of supposition and a lot of hypothetical language. And I'm fearful for the residents who are quite frankly very afraid because they don't understand what's happening and they don't understand the document. And they say it's a survey, yet they're going to be placing people in a lottery to move them. So if it's a survey, why are you placing people somewhere else? A survey is to take information so that you can determine how to move, not to move people. So this is the deception that the seniors are facing. And I can't imagine what the other residents are receiving in regards to this move. So that's basically it.
We really have, we only have 5 minutes. Is that lottery within the NYCHA? It's not it's a special lottery that they have, right?
It's a special lottery for those as of rights buildings that's proposed to be demolished.
Okay. I see Len said, Renee, you want to go first and respond to that? Do you have a response to that?
Okay, so between the two campuses, there are 214 empty apartments combined with everything. Yes, they've been warehousing them for a long time. NYCHA is not in compliance with its own policy in this case. You just don't lottery off a NYCHA apartment, so they're violating that. So that's the regional HUD office needs to let them know, and the RAD office itself. So those are some of the things that could be done. But we also are working on having discussions with the seniors as well. And everything is going to depending. That may be, was that the newsletter?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
so
that was the letter that they received on their doors.
Okay. So yeah, we're working on all these issues. And I mean all of them.
Yeah. Okay. So
thank you for the clarification of the number, but 120 of them are only renovated.
Right. He said NYCHA gave them 120, even though there's so much more. Yes.
Right. And I should add, it's NYCHA. NYCHA is complicit in this. NYCHA is complicit. It's Essence. It's Related. And it is, what's the other one? HOU.
Yes.
Okay.
They're all complicit in this. The letter is headed by all 4 of those participants.
Yeah.
Of course. They're all the PAC partners. They all have something to gain.
Right.
Yeah.
They're trying to make sure
they propose that it's a RAD PAC agreement, which is not.
Right. So actually the FEIS has been finalized. It was finalized on Friday. So it came out.
Okay.
So yes. Also we have just heard, we all know about that they've added as the 7th one alternative is the City of Yes. Don't know what that would be. to be quite honest, don't know what any of these alternatives is because there's no discussion about income bands and doesn't matter because we don't want to be demolished. So I really don't care about the income band.
That's
Can't
right.
keep sacrificing for people.
Exactly.
That was our mistake by having that infill building at the corner. No one should have an infill building. No NYCHA development should have an infill building. There are thousands of empty lots in the city. Need to start building on that. So yeah, that's where we're at in this mess.
Yeah. Lynn, you want to chime in real quick? We got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to make a proposal or a suggestion. And I think I talked to Renee about this the other day about going to all the seniors and the people in the Fulton in 401 19th Street to talk to them about signing an agreement with attorneys to where they say that they will be represented by attorneys, and then taking that agreement and that statement and turning it into HOU, which will prevent them from contacting seniors directly. They'll have to talk to their attorneys first. And it seems to me that that's a step that can be taken right away. Go, we do a blitz and go door to door to the seniors, explaining to them what this is, that essentially they're attempting to empty the building so that they can go forward with the demolition, and explain this and have them sign this, have some lawyers lined up either through NYLAG or through another firm. There are two firms that I've talked with about the possibility of representing the tenants. And you need to have lawyers who are ready, willing, and able to represent people at the housing authority, because they have a right to a hearing, they have a right to counsel, and that's the way to move forward. That's the way to put a delay on this. I think the key is we need to delay this until we get a new city administration, where we can then have the tenants go and speak to the city administration, the new mayor, and talk about what needs to get done and how to correct this.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And with
Yes,
that,
it
we're gonna
is.
have to close. And we're on another link for our next meeting. By the way, Luana, Renee, I think you have the link there, Leonard and Alex. So I'll see you at that link in about since we close here. And with that, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate having you here. There's a lot more to discuss on this, I know. And I wish we could go on, but thank you again. And we'll see you next month, first Tuesday of every month. And I'll sign off with that.
Mhm.